Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Parent Pod. Every week, we try and introduce you or expose you to wonderful women and men in our community that are both resources or leaders and get a little bit of fun, some education, information, plus we do some giveaways. So tonight, I am excited to announce we are being joined by Elana Doyle. She is a local mom from Mashpee, and we're going to be talking about a really, really important topic that affects all of us, and especially the mothers watching. And this is how women have been affected by the pandemic, especially working women. And so there's a lot of facets to this conversation. So I'm really excited she's going to be joining us for this. Additionally, a portion of the way through, we will stop for a little bit and we have a special kindness gift for someone, a lucky mom who was nominated in our community by her friend, and we'll be calling to surprise her. Also, if you have questions or want to share stories for Elana and I as we're talking, you can submit your questions into the comments and you can be entered to win a prize. One of tonight's prizes is a little harvest sign, which was actually made by a former co-worker of mine and teacher down in Immokalee, Florida at Lake Trafford Elementary School, near and dear to my heart, Immokalee, Florida, where I got the start of my teaching career. Wonderful kids, and they made these as part of a fundraiser for their classroom so that they can each have their own supplies. As everyone knows, you need your own supplies nowadays with COVID-19. So that being said, I hope your kids are occupado in bed, listening to a story, watching a show. No judgment here, whatever you need to do, but this hour is for you. So let's get started, and we're going to bring Elana on, and we're so glad she's joining us. And here we go. Elena's coming on. Welcome, Elana. How are you?
Hi, Amy. How are you? It's actually Elana. It's pronounced Elana.
It's okay. I've been Elana for so long. I'm so sorry.
It's happened my whole life.
So Elana Doyle is joining us, everybody, and we're really excited about it. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi, everyone. My name is Elana Doyle. I've actually lived on Cape my entire life. I grew up in Sandwich and then made a huge move over to Mashpee, a whole 5 minutes down the road. Right now, I am raising my two children, Kyle and Madison, with my husband, Kyle. I am a stay-at-home mom. Before that, I worked in banking for several years, graduated from Cape Cod Community College, UMass Dartmouth, and most recently graduated from the campaign school at Yale. It was a very great experience.
Excellent. Excellent. So we're talking about a tough topic today.
Yeah.
I guess we'll just dive right into it. Women in the workforce. We have fought for decades. Our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, I mean, way far back, we have fought for a long time in the job sector to have equal rights, equal benefits, equal pay, equal respect. And COVID-19 hit. And I don't think anybody realized until it was actually happening that we did not have the structure in place to really catch what was going to happen. And what happened was working women and even non-working, we have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the perspective of a stay-at-home parent, March, all of a sudden I became a teacher as well as a full-time mom. And I understand why teachers go to school for what they do, because you can know things, but how to teach them is something totally different. So that was a challenge in its own. But I mean, when you look at working mothers who have had to deal with now finding childcare for their children who are no longer in school, I don't think it's a coincidence that through August and September, there were 1.1 million people who completely dropped out of the workforce. So they're not unemployed, they're not looking for work anymore. And out of those 1.1 million people, 865,000 of them were women. And I don't think the timing is a coincidence. I mean, August to September is right before school starts. I think women needed to adjust to be able to accommodate their child's new schedules.
Absolutely. And yeah, that number that you're talking about on the 865,000, that was August and September.
Just August and September. Yeah.
That doesn't count prior to that. That doesn't count what's happened since that, what will continue to happen. And the U.S. Department of Labor has done a recent study on this, and they have said working women are experiencing the absolute worst effects of COVID-19. Because in previous shutdowns, which typically kind of hit men the hardest, more women, they're suggesting, have lost their jobs because the industries that women tend to work in have been hit harder. And so those industries tend to be hospitality, healthcare,
retail,
government jobs. And so this has not been good. You know, you're talking 40% right here. 40% of all working women are employed in government and in health and education services compared with 20% of working men. And so not only has it hit the job area harder, additionally, the childcare issue and the school issue. And so the shutdowns, closing the schools and the daycare centers around the country have forced parents to stay at home.
Yep. Take on extra responsibility.
Extra responsibility because of gender stereotypes that have been long instilled in culture. Women have had to take that on the chin. It's like we're expected to soldier up and take care of it. And it's funny. I actually had a little discussion with my husband this week about it because Wednesday was a day off because of Veterans Day. And it was funny. He calls me on Tuesday and he goes, "Oh yeah, there's no school tomorrow, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "So you're taking the day off, right?" I'm like, I snapped and I love my husband. But I took out all this frustration on him because I was like, why should I have to? Because I'm the woman? Because I'm the mother? You take the day off. Like, how dare you? And we figured it out later. But it is this expectation that women and the mothers are going to get it done. And they're going to take care of it. And, you know, we're happy to. We know we're awesome. But at the same time,
it's very stressful and tolling.
It's very stressful. You know? Like even in your case, and moms who are staying at home, we didn't expect to be running a household and teaching, and teaching, like you said, your own kid in front of sometimes a virtual screen is really hard.
Well, not just that, you already know how your kids act differently with you as the mom versus someone they might respect a little more outside of the household. Exactly. So that's a challenge in itself.
Absolutely. And so they also say working women are at a greater disadvantage because fewer women have jobs that allow them to telecommute. I found that really interesting. 22% of female workers compared with 28% of male workers have the option to telecommute. Then in addition, you add in single parents. So you have couples, right? Yep. And then you have single parents, and they're even hit even harder. There is no option there. It is either I don't put food on the table or I don't educate my kids.
Yeah, and then at the beginning of the pandemic, you have daycares who are given these state mandates where they have to cut their class sizes in half. So if you're on that unlucky end and you're a single parent, you're working 1, 2, 3 jobs, you suddenly are brought to this crossroads where you have to take full responsibility of your child for their daycare and still figure out how to work, how to make ends meet. And we all know that the government was a little behind on trying to supplement the costs that incurred. But I just can't even imagine the challenges that single parents have faced, knowing the challenges that 2-parent families have faced, being hard enough as it is.
Yeah, the Department of Labor says 20% of single parents reported being able to telecommute compared to 40% of married people with children. Even 40% on the married, like that is unacceptable. It really is.
Well, you think about, like what you said, the different types of jobs that women have versus men, and you go back to a retail job. I mean, if you're working in retail or you're working in hospitality, you are customer service face to face, and it's hard to translate what your roles are into an at-home, into a telecommuted position. So,
absolutely. One of the other things too is that, again, women tend to they're providing 60% of the childcare. Men on average are providing 7.2 hours of childcare a week versus over 10 hours for women. It's funny. Sometimes you hear the dads going, "Oh, I have to babysit the kids." Say, "They're your kids. You're not babysitting anybody."
That's my favorite line. My husband's, "Oh, so I'm watching them. I'm babysitting today." I'm like,
yeah.
Not quite.
I think some babysitting today.
Yeah, no, there are some awesome fathers who definitely pull their weight in the childcare. But I mean, when you look at a household like mine, my husband works 5 days a week. He's gone from 6 a.m. He comes home at like 4:45. So he does, by nature, have less time with the children. And it comes with a different type of work too.
Absolutely.
And that was one of the things that really affected women, and why so many women were chosen to drop out of the workforce within their family, is because the men just had the higher paying job. It made more financial sense for the women to leave the workforce, which I don't think is necessarily right, but that is the case. Like I said, you look at us, and Kyle works in construction, whereas I worked in banking, and the salaries of the two aren't comparable. So it made more sense for me to stay home.
So you threw out a number earlier about a million, over a million.
1.1 million.
Yeah. And that's a scary number to hear. And as I was researching with the Department of Labor, their study had said that eventually when this is all, did I lose her? She's coming back. She'll come back. I'll keep going. So eventually they are anticipating actually 15 million single mothers in the United States will be the most severely affected, with little potential for receiving other sources of childcare and an even smaller likelihood of continuing to work during the crisis. I'm going to bring Elana back on here. Hold on a second. We just had some technical difficulties.
I'm not sure what happened there.
Sometimes it's the internet. Everybody's on it nowadays.
Yeah.
So I was just sharing, I kept going for a second, but we had already talked about that million number. And one of the numbers they threw out is actually, when this is all said and done, 15 million of single mothers. So this is just a very specific group. 15 million single mothers in the United States will be the most severely affected, with little potential for receiving other sources of childcare and a smaller likelihood of continuing to work. That is crazy to me. 15 million single mothers will be thrown out of the job market here. And that's crazy to me. I mean, I know you and I, we talked a little bit before we started. There is some good news. There are employers that are working really hard at adjusting and honoring really good employees and trying to keep them on. They're becoming aware of the childcare needs.
Yeah.
They're trying to adopt more flexible work schedules and telecommuting options. I'm very blessed with my accounting job. Luckily, it's a family business, but for all of us working there, there's two of us who are younger mothers. And we've been blessed to have flexible working schedules, telecommuting options, options flexible just to leave. If something comes up, if you got to do this, no problem. And the ability to make up those hours somewhere else. But that's stressful even in itself, because if you're counting on 40 hours a week and then something comes up and you're out of FMLA with nothing to bounce it off of, then you start to go, okay, whatever do I need to cut budget-wise at home that I now can't afford? And you have to make tough choices then.
Yeah, no, it's really sad, but it's a double-edged sword as to why this is happening. I mean, you think about it, and the businesses that shut down, I mean, almost 100,000 businesses have closed permanently since then. So you have people who are losing jobs just solely because the business that they worked for closed. And then, like we said, schooling and daycare. I mean, you have some hybrid models, some on-off models, you have some fully in-person models, but it's also constantly changing, which doesn't work well with a schedule. And I mean, employers can try their hardest to be flexible, but at some point when there's no known schedule, it's really hard to be a full-time employee and go week to week this week I can come in, next week I can't, or Monday the school's going to be closed, so I can come in or I can't. And like we did mention before, it's kind of very scary that so many parents rely on the school system to care for their children while they're working.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to that later about potential solutions for that, that the U.S. really, and we need to advocate for those. And we're going to talk about it, what we can do as women, as fathers, as mothers, how we can advocate for what really needs to happen. And it's been a long time coming. I didn't get to say this earlier when we talk about the 865,000 women in just August and September. That's compared. Let me tell you how many men left the job working.
Oh, yeah.
216,000. See the disparity there for those watching? I mean, it's crazy to me. And again, it has to do with benefits. They might be getting paid more, things like that. But again, this is a way we're not thinking in modern times. We're still thinking like families.
Stereotypical gender roles.
No, this isn't 1950 anymore. June Cleaver is not at home vacuuming all day and getting him his food for when he comes home. It's not Leave It to Beaver. The reality of the situation is, even in dual parent working households, they're both working or they're both doing something. And if they're not, childcare itself or being stay-at-home mom is a job.
Yeah,
it's a job.
absolutely.
That's what people think. Trust me, and I think we all, even those of us who, had wished that maybe we had gotten to stay home for a long time, I think many of us have probably changed our that after being home with children for 5 months. And maybe them moving into your bedroom and still sleeping on your floor. It's like the chop in my house, in Seattle. So it's kind of crazy. In July, I don't know if you remember that Washington Post article. You see it about coronavirus childcare crisis will set women back a generation after they said 1 out of every 4 women reported becoming unemployed during the pandemic, mostly due to a lack of childcare, twice the rate of men. And then the CNN ran the headline, "Working mothers are quitting to take care of their kids, and the U.S. job market may never be the same." We're losing talent. We are losing so much. So what can we do?
Well, I mean, we have to have more childcare. It's a hard problem to answer because you know what? It is an industry that's not necessarily easy to get into, to break into, to start a childcare business, at least outside of your home, to have an actual center. There's a lot of regulation. There's a lot of training. There's a lot that goes into it, and it's a big investment. So I think that our communities, maybe our towns, the states, need to recognize that, take a look at the process that it takes to start a childcare business, or what they are investing or aren't investing in the process, because there's not a lot of options. I was thinking about going back to work a month or two before the pandemic, and when looking to find a center that could take both of my kids at the same place, same location, it's impossible. We came across one, and just the cost was astronomical, that it wasn't worth it for me to go back to work then. And like I said, this is pre-pandemic. So I think that there's a lot of structural issues that need to be addressed. I think that there's a lot of financial issues that need to be addressed, whether that comes in the form of grants or different opportunities for people to start new daycare centers. And in the age of COVID, like we touched on a little bit, schools have become such a form of childcare for working parents that when there's not a regular schedule, that interrupts the whole flow of working, of having your child in a safe environment during the day. And what do we need to do to fill in those gaps in this uncertain time?
So what blows my mind is actually back during H1N1 and that whole thing, mid 2000, 2010-ish, somewhere around there. A study came out, and it was revolving around that as a pandemic. And it was a very extensive study, and they talked about how long-term closures of schools or childcare were actually not great, because they're good if you have to quickly curb
Yeah.
curve, right? But long term, you actually lose more. We lose more economically. We lose more to mental health issues.
Yeah.
We lose more in the achievement gap in
Yeah.
academics. And so we talk about, you're right, schools have become this childcare aspect and that we really depend on to be able to do what we need to do. And in that study, they actually said there will be another pandemic. It will be worse. These will continue for decades. That's par for the course. I mean, 8 billion, we're approaching 8 billion people right on the planet. In 2050, I think we're scheduled to be over 10 billion by 2050. That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
The country of Nigeria is going to they are going to have more population in a smaller area than the entire United States. They will outpace us. And so with increasing population comes increasing pandemic type issues, as well as many other resource issues. And so they told us to prepare then. They said, prepare then. You need to start. I remember reading it and I was like, nobody said anything. Nobody started planning with the schools and childcare. I never heard a politician bring up, not once, hey, we need to solve this problem. There is going to come a time where you may have to be home with your kids long term. What are we going to do about that? We need to care. It's like all these studies on Cape Cod. They talk about how we have an eroding coastline, right?
Yeah.
And we have to make plans to retreat. Every year it comes up at town meetings. We have to start making plans to retreat. And what happens? Oh no, we're just going to rebuild the road there and support it. You can't fight this. You need to make a long-term plan. We can't just keep pushing the can down the road. We cannot do it anymore. And not only are we suffering, you have a whole demographic of people, minorities. We talked about the single moms, but minorities who are suffering even more because they're already at a bigger disadvantage right now. And so they're taking it on the chin even harder. That will be even harder for them to re-enter if they are able to at all someday. So childcare is really a big issue. And they said after COVID is done, that the childcare sector will actually lose, because as you know, many have closed. 4.5 million childcare slots could be lost permanently. And yes, is that going to take other people coming in? Is it going to take different standards? I mean, it's so cost prohibitive to even open up a childcare. People don't make money off it. The people who are operating these facilities, and then we're paying I think the minimum around here in this region is at least $200 a week for full time.
Yeah,
lower end.
Yeah, the rates I saw were consistent with $200 to $300 per kid.
And you really think about that. That's a lot of money.
It is.
I think
that's just one kid.
That's just one, right? I tallied up once how much I had spent on my son between the time he first went to childcare and the time that he entered kindergarten. And it was over $100,000. I'm like, I could have sent you to a private college for $100,000.
Right. Could have sent you off to Switzerland to some boarding school.
If I'm going to be paying that, I mean, you're talking at one kid on the low end, $200 a week, you're talking $10,400. And, we get a tax credit, right, for childcare. Tax credit, which maxes out at it's a couple $100. It's insane.
You know what? While you mentioned that, that's another thing that we could really look at is a better tax credit, because I think it should be up to $10,000, 100% fully refundable, back in your pocket. And you know what? I have an idea for where to get that. You want to hear? Well, I think it should just be deducted from your income when you do your tax. When you do your taxes, this is what you spent in childcare. Okay, we're not taxing that.
Yeah, because you're these are future workers for America, future contributors. I've even thought about giving childcare grants up front, and I think between you and I, maybe our elected officials should take a pay cut. I mean, everybody else took a pay cut through the pandemic. You
won't hear me arguing against that.
Listen, state of Massachusetts, the governor, if you just cut your marketing budget or your office budget, which actually increased this year, should not have increased with how much people are hurting. If you had cut 10% on your payroll in your office or 10% on your marketing budget alone, that I mean, if you went across the board with all the elected officials, we'd have millions to put back. That could be the next PPP or the FMLA type loan to give employers. You keep working parents and
Amy, that's a whole animal in itself, is that politics hasn't become public service, it's become a career.
That's right.
But we could spend a whole other hour talking about that.
So 10 million mothers of young children were in the labor force in 2019. And this shows you just how insufficient childcare how it is and how it affects the work. It affects long-term economic.
It's a house of cards.
Yeah. And the risk of mothers leaving the workforce. Now here's the even bigger kicker. Let's talk about this. What is it going to cost America? Because there's a dollar sign attached to this. By letting women leave the workforce, by not putting things into place like childcare, like workable schedules, whatever it was going to take. The risk of mothers leaving the labor force and reducing work hours in order to assume caretaking responsibilities amounts to, are we all ready for this? $64.5 billion a year in loss.
I believe it.
So we're in 2020. We will have lost at least $64.5 billion in lost wages. That's payroll taxes. That's money they weren't spending back into the local economies, all of that. Then we're going to do it again for 2021 and maybe for 2022.
There's going to be ripple effects to this, economic ripple effects that, I think is going to put a lot of families into poverty or push them down the scale more so than they were before. I mean, you take away someone's ability to work, and if they can't bring their kids to a safe place to have childcare, then you know what, they're going to need help, and they can't work themselves, then people are going to have to pay for it in the form of tax benefit, or not tax benefits, but taxpayer funded programs. And it's not that that's a bad thing if that's their only option, but we are getting ourselves into a hole that
let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
So when people then have to rely on the government, and again, there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
if you need help temporarily, that's what it's supposed to be.
Exactly.
But
if you take away their ability to work, and these aren't people who want to stay home. These are people who want to work, who want to provide for their family. But if they don't have an option, then it's like their hand is forced.
And then this will create more pressure on those programs. There won't be as much money in those programs because you're losing $64.5 billion a year. There's less.
Exactly.
There's less in our schools. There's less for our police. There's less for our firefighters. There's really less for politicians. And so you can't have economic growth if this is happening. And it'll put such a strain on the system, the safety net system, that more people, because the taxes will go up for everybody else to try and make up for that. And that's understandable, but it will cause then more people to fall into that gap.
Exactly, because then you have people who, like myself, say, is it worth it to work? Not like if you're paying more taxes. That was part of my cost analysis of going back to work. We would be up a tax bracket, the cost of childcare. And it got to the point where, well, if I go back to work, it makes no financial sense. We're breaking even for me to go work 40 plus hours a week and to have our children go into care. So all of that comes into play, and it's a ripple effect. Like I said, it's going to last for years if it keeps going this way.
It's really bad. Maternal labor force participation has been increasing over time steadily. The last several years leading up to this were excellent. We were making major gains, but even a 5% decline, I think we're at that more than 5% now, it would undo at least 25 years of progress. So we've already set ourselves back.
Well, One study has been following women and both women and men in their workforce participation. And this is actually the first year in 6 years that they found women leaving the workforce at a higher rate than men. So we had so much progress in the last decade, and probably before then, since before they started tracking the information. But in 6 years, this is the first year that women are leaving at a higher rate than men.
And again, we're going to have those ripple effects
Mm-hmm.
for decades.
Yeah.
For decades. It will take us decades to reach back to where we were. And even when schools all do, let's pretend for a minute that the people who are super hopeful, and I'm going to be hopeful for a second. All right, let's say by the spring, all the schools are fully open for in-person instruction and COVID just disappears. And child care is reopened, they expand their enrollment. You're still going to have a problem with women re-entering that workforce because they've already exited.
Yeah.
And so the longer women are out, or anybody's out of the workforce, once you get to 6 months, you're less likely to be called back than those with no relevant work experience who've been unemployed for less time, because you're lengthening your time.
The gap on the resume.
Yep.
Please explain this gap. What were you doing?
I don't know. You know what I say? I say, I am a soldier and I am fighting a war, okay? Our parents' generation did not have to fight a war against an unseen enemy. We are fighting a war against an unseen enemy that's attacking us from all angles, economically, physically, mentally. And, you know, this is a challenge. It wasn't what we signed up for.
Yeah.
And we're going to soldier up, and we're going to do it, and we're going to get it done. We're not going to always like it, but we will do it because we're mothers and we're women.
Yeah.
And that's what we do. And, you know, our men will support us. But, you know, it's just, there's so many issues that are compounded. You then add in, if they're trying to return to the workforce, you got discrimination against mothers that has always existed about hiring mothers, especially mothers of color, or who are minorities or have less experience. And quite frankly, that, like we said earlier, that childcare is likely, you're going to lose those spots. So there'll be even less. We'll all be competing, which is also going to drive up prices potentially for childcare. I mean, your insurance is going to go up. We're going to have to pay more. So it's eventually going to become virtually impossible for them to return.
Already, I couldn't tell you how many mothers I've seen posts on Facebook in some of like the local community groups saying, who has childcare openings? Who can take my child? Or I'm pregnant now and I'm already thinking about childcare because I know that there's already a waiting list. So, I mean, it's already a problem now, and I don't see it getting any better anytime soon.
And, you know, I want to go back to the wage gap that has been hard fought for so many decades. And there was a significant narrowing of that wage gap during the 70s and 80s. And we made progress until we reached the peak in the late 1990s. And since then, that wage gap, that's kind of remained stagnant. There hasn't been major progress towards strengthening and narrowing it completely. We've kind of stayed in that spot. So now this is undoing it even more.
Well, in all fairness, I also feel like with the wage gap, they also don't always take into consideration career choices. I mean, like I kind of touched on, my husband and I was working in banking, he was working in construction. Just they pay different. One is a skilled trade, one is one that's more learnable, which I'm not saying one is less important than the other, but I mean, women tend to choose trade jobs less often than men do. It's a conversation in its own.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't help the situation that we are forced to leave the workforce because it makes more economical sense. It's definitely not fair. It might be what makes sense for your family, but it doesn't feel right at the end of the day.
Women are also more likely because of this to be affected long-term for their retirement.
Absolutely.
Because traditionally women have fewer alternative sources of income after retirement than men. So we tend to be more likely to rely on Social Security retirement and disability benefits. And because they're based on lifetime earnings.
Exactly. Taking a year, taking 2 years off.
You've lost all that income
Exactly.
that you're already behind in anyway. So anytime you're taking out, it's reducing your worker hours, it's lowering your pay, and it's affecting retirement.
Yeah.
Not that our generation will probably ever get to retire anyway.
I don't think we're going to be seeing any Social Security by the time we're.
I remind myself that I'm going to be working till I die. You know, hopefully working at a school with underprivileged children. That's what I'm going to do with my retirement. I feel like that would be fun. In the Caribbean, that's where I want to be.
Oh, yeah. You and me both.
So it's crazy, but the likelihood of women holding pensions now decreases, employer-based retirement plans. So it's just absolutely insane. So let's talk about, before we call our friend, I want to talk about some of the things we can do. So there are some things that are currently sitting in Congress. There is a $50 billion plan that has the U.S. House of Representatives have already passed with bipartisan votes, which were multiple child care bills that await action in the Senate. And this includes the Child Care is Essential Act, which consists of $50 billion to stabilize the child care sector, and additional child care legislation that the House passed as a down payment on the long-term child care infrastructure. They need to act on this. And I know this isn't the total solution. It's kind of like a Band-Aid to stem the flow right now, right?
Anything the federal government does comes with lots and lots of strings.
Lots of caveats. But I feel like something like this at least is a step in the right direction. I wish they would move faster because we are losing more day by day. And it affects so much. I mean, it will affect our kids. And they need to come up with other stuff. We need to start talking to other experts. We need to do some study here. Like, what can we do? We need to explore the cost for families, employers, communities of remote versus hybrid, summer care. I mean, childcare is essential. It is absolutely essential.
Oh, yeah.
No longer, it can't be treated as like, oh, this is like, if you can afford it, like it's a benefit because you make money. Like, that's not. If people need to work to put food on their table, to put a roof over their head. If we cannot do that, we become more dependent. And I don't think any of us want that, because let's think about what that's going to look like long term. More and more people, if you eventually end up with like 80% of the U.S. population dependent upon the government, we have a problem.
Yeah. That's not good. It's not good for anyone. I feel like working is really empowering in just how you feel like when you're providing for your own family. And I feel like a lot of people want to work, but childcare can be a barrier to be able to work. And I think personally, a lot has to be done on the state levels. Just from anyone who's paid attention to the federal government in the last 10 years knows that they're not always necessarily the best answer to every problem, but I think incentivizing new business, new childcare centers to open. I think big businesses providing childcare is an incentive for people to want to work there. You think of the Walmarts of the world, you think of the Targets of the world, who have the capital to be able to do that, and think about who they'll attract. If, hey, childcare is part of this, we have childcare on site, guess what? Hey, sign me up, So I think there's a lot of creative ways to attack it. There's
been a lot of businesses in the past couple of years that have started in the U.S. I think of Silicon Valley that have started. They have gyms inside their businesses. They have childcare. It becomes a whole community. And, it is attracting talented, quality workers who are loyal, who are staying there. And a loyal employee is a productive employee.
Exactly.
If you eliminate these things as an employer, and even small businesses around here can do this. If you are rewarding your employees with things that you say, I appreciate you, if this is going to help make things easier, they're going to stay loyal to you. They're going to produce more. They're going to earn for you. They're going to work really hard. They're going to stay with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good thing. That means your business is going to thrive because they're going to bring everything to the table because they know you care about them.
Exactly. You're going to attract quality candidates who want to stay long term. It's a great incentive. But like I said, the state has to do a lot with the regulations and the whole process of just even getting the licenses to start up a child care center. Because I know so many women who do it at their home because it's not as much of an investment as opening up a center. But when you kind of take away some of those barriers, I think you'll see a lot more opportunity and a lot more interest in women and men potentially pursuing that as a business.
Absolutely. And, they need workplace rules when they originally created them were not set up with caregiving in mind. They weren't, we need to restructure. It has to be prioritized for care, which will actually accelerate this gender equality here. I think about other countries who are so far ahead of us in terms of maternity and paternity, even after having a child. And there are some countries that give like between 80 to 100% of what your pay was for that first year off. We need things like that. We need like the FMLA was a good starting point in this that unfortunately kind of hit the kibosh because by the time people could finally claim into it, we were in the middle of the pandemic because that was the summer. And so we really need to work on those things. And so how do we work on those things? So it really starts, the most important thing is locally. Yeah. Locally advocating to your representatives, to your state senators. And the way we can do that is you call them, you email them, you tell them how important it is. And you don't just do it once, you do it repeatedly. I mean, when I really care about something, and I'll use David Vieira as an example, I'm like knocking down his door. This needs to be dealt with. I will not stop until it's dealt with. Yeah. And then I'm out there telling everybody else, you need to email. Here's his email. And that's what it takes, it takes, the more they hear your voice or multiple voices, the more they know it's an issue.
Well, it's also important, and I am such an advocate for civic engagement, is women should step up and seek these positions as well, local, state. I mean, there's no better advocate for your community than you. And I mean, I ran for selectman in Mashpee a while ago, and I learned something actually really interesting. So if you're running a campaign, you can use campaign funds to rent a tux for a night. You can't use campaign funds to hire a babysitter to go campaign.
Wait a minute. That's the first.
There's legislation at the State House ready to go to end this parental discrimination, and it hasn't gone anywhere. So you can go, like I said, you can have a campaign event, rent a tux, pay for it with your campaign funds, but you can't hire a babysitter to go attend your campaign. Or you can pay someone to go door knock for you, but you cannot pay a babysitter so you can go door knock.
That's disgusting. I had no idea. That really actually pisses me off.
Yeah. And
that's horrifying. That is discrimination. That's discrimination against parents and women in particular.
And you wonder why. You look at the demographic of our legislators and our leaders, and
so let's talk about even at Board of Selectmen or town meeting. When you look at this, so Falmouth is supposed to have a town meeting on Monday, and I'm a town meeting member. Yeah. And there's a lot of emails going around. People don't want to go in person to the building, even though precautions have been taken. And there were some offenders last time taking off their masks, and hopefully they'll be checked by the speaker this time. But I've been throwing out for a couple of years now, and I'm starting to get a little headway in direction for how to approach this. But why isn't this an all-day Saturday meeting with childcare? Why isn't this? Why is it on a weeknight? If you had an all-day meeting, we could bang that stuff out in one day. None of this 2-3 night nonsense, okay? Which is efficient, and it's after a work day. So by doing that, who are the people that are most affected? People who are working people, who are young parents, they don't run for town meeting. They're not getting a voice there because it's a certain demographic who is retired or older, who primarily has the time for that on a Monday night.
Well, Amy, we're dealing with the same thing in Mashpee right now, and I actually reached out to the Board of Selectmen, and we're having it on the agenda for a discussion because, when I served on the Mashpee Inclusion and Diversity Committee, we got childcare for one of our town meetings, and we ran into a lot of barriers, a lot of legality issues where we can't take all the kids. Obviously, we had to take kids only who are potty trained above the age of 3. So we're still not helping everyone who needs the care to be able to attend. And you have people who work. Are they supposed to take the night off to be able to vote? You have people who are disabled. I talked to a disabled veteran. He said, I cannot physically attend. I care, but I can't attend. Another lady just said, I'm tired. I work all day. Going to an auditorium for 4 hours after work when I have to work the next day, it's not feasible for me. Exactly. So, and then you think about the people who are in the military. My brother is actively deployed. Well, he actually just got home yesterday, so that's exciting. But you think about people who are deployed. They have no option whatsoever to participate in all of these things that are being voted on in their town. And you want to talk about voter suppression in 2020? Well, put town meeting at the top of the list because you literally have demographics of people who are afraid of COVID. Exactly, who cannot attend. My husband hasn't been to a single town meeting since we moved to Mashpee because he's had to watch our kids every single time.
No, it's a fact. Young parents or the younger generation, as well as minorities, are not being fairly represented. And that is because we're working. Or we have children.
We have kids.
There's no, and is that fair? Is that really fair that they're making all those decisions? And they are elected to represent the people. But in my experience, at least in Falmouth, because we're elected to represent our precinct.
We have open meeting.
You have open meeting.
Yeah.
But in my experience, the majority of town meeting members vote how they personally feel as opposed to how their electorate feels.
It's no better in Mashpee because we had a little over 100 people go to our town meeting a couple weeks ago, but we had 8,000 people vote on our ballot questions for the town. So it's not that people don't care or aren't interested. It's that town meeting isn't accessible in the way that a ballot is.
Absolutely. So before we're going to come back, I want to do, before it gets too late, really quick, we're going to call, and hopefully she's watching. Her name is Michaela, and she was nominated by her friend Danielle. And we're going to call and surprise her and then get her out a little gift. Michaela, I hope you're watching. I'm excited to surprise you. Sometimes they answer, sometimes they don't, but that's okay, right? So hopefully you can hear this.
Your call is
went right to voicemail. Okay, we'll leave her a message.
77423898880.
I didn't mean to put all that out there.
Record your message. When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press.
So we'll read it for everybody here. Hi, Michaela. This is Amy from Cape Cod Moms, and I'm here on the Parent Pod with Elana Doyle, and we are actually calling because you were this week's winner of the Random Act of Kindness, and you were nominated by a friend of yours named Danielle. And I just want to read you what she wrote for our viewers and for you. Michaela is a mom of a 3-year-old and an ER nurse. She constantly puts others first and shows up for those she cares about. She is the type of friend who will come over to help you watch your kids. Amen to that.
Right?
And not care if your house is a mess. We all need friends like her. Yes, we do. Michaela, thank you for being so awesome. When you get this message, feel free to send me a text or a call, or you can message my page. And I just need an address, and we'll get you something out within the next week. Thank you so much for being awesome and an inspiration to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, it's my favorite part every week. So as we start to wrap up, let's go back to advocating. It really needs to start with us. And I can tell people from experience, as my husband likes to tell me all the time, you're becoming such an advocate now. You're like, you're always into everything. And you know what? Because that's the only way. If I don't do it,
Yeah. No one's going to do it for you.
So I'm not someone who's just going to wait around for someone else to do it for me. And I've been inspired by a lot of the things that I've done. There's been things that maybe people have felt differently about than me, but it's all about advocating for
Absolutely.
what you know needs to happen. And change can happen. It takes time. And, we got to work together on this. And this is such, to me, things affecting parents right now, whether it's the workforce, the job aspect of it, whether it's mental health, whether it's the achievement gap with our kids. This is a crucial time, and
Absolutely.
stand to lose a lot. I don't want to be the generation bringing
That kicks the can.
Yeah, I don't want to kick it anymore.
Like you said, it's going to happen again at some point.
And guess what? Guess what? Millennials, and yes, we are millennials. I hate to admit that I'm a millennial. I took a whole seminar today about millennials, and the lady called my age group middle-aged, and I almost fell off my chair. But you know what? It's time to put up or shut up.
Yep.
We cannot, between the planet, between the economy, between what's going on in the world, everything, it's time to put up or shut up. We cannot lose any more time. And it is crucial. We have to set the stage for the generation we are raising. We have to make them good stewards of the world, of the planet, good human beings. I mean, they have to see by our example. And, I know there's so many causes out there, but this affects our children.
Absolutely.
So many things right now because it affects school. It affects the food on your table. It affects everything, the mental health aspect of it alone. We got to do something. It cannot continue. If that means you got to get on the phone, if that means you got to get out and run for town meeting if you are voted in, if that means you have to, if we have to team up and find babysitters so that we can go in person to Mashpee or Sandwich town meetings, which are open town meetings, if that means we have to start running for Board of Selectmen or even for little positions, that's where the change is going to happen.
Exactly.
Additionally, make your state reps and your senators and all of them, get on the phone with them. Tell them how you feel. Encourage others to do the same.
Yes, and don't be discouraged if they don't answer. Keep at it. Keep going.
They are listening. They have people who accumulate all the information.
Yeah.
And I remember early on on the school thing when we were talking about schools maybe not reopening, and I was just like, write this letter. And when their phones start blowing up, that drives them crazy because they're like, oh God, okay, we need to pay attention to this.
Exactly. They start paying attention.
If they don't hear from you, they think it's fine.
And they can also say at the end, well, no one said anything to me. I didn't hear anything about it. There was no complaints. You know how many times I've heard that after something? I'm like, how did this happen? How did this go through? Well, I didn't hear from anyone on it.
Right. And I think the first thing we should all do tomorrow, and I would love to see an influx of calls, and you know what? I'm going to be the first one to write to my buddy David and to Sue Moran. I'm going to be like, why do you get reimbursed from campaign funds for a studio tuxedo, but you can't get a babysitter reimbursed? Yeah. That's ridiculous.
I know.
Fix that crap now.
Well, like I said, there's a bill that's been actually in waiting for a while. It's just getting it through, but clearly it's not a priority.
Well, it's time that they hear from the people who it affects, and that it is a priority. There's millions of us. Millions. And who is the toughest critic of all? Mama bears. You don't mess with Mama bear. They get a bone, they get a whiff of that, they're going to come for the jugular every time. And guess what? We're fighting for our kids. So start fighting for them. Fight for your little girls to have, equal pay, to have some to get back into that workforce. Fight for the boys to be supportive of women and trying to advocate as well for equal childcare and solve this problem. We have to solve this problem. Again, it can't be kicked down the road. Last words to you, Elana.
Well, thank you for everyone who's made it this far and listened to us. It is a very scary time, but there is hope for the future. And if we all work together, we can change the status quo and really have a better experience the next time an issue like this comes around.
It absolutely can happen. I've seen it happen on smaller issues. Never doubt that a small group of dedicated people can change the world. Moms, dads, I'm calling on all of you. This is your call to action. Wherever side you sit on politically, we're all on the same side for this.
Absolutely.
And our kids. So get it done. Stand up, say something, and fight for them, because this is the future. This is the future. And if not us, then who?
And you know what, Amy? They're the ones losing out right now, is our kids.
That's right. And we cannot let that happen.
Nope.
We would be irresponsible too. So thank you so much to Elana for joining me. Thank you to Michaela for being an awesome winner tonight. Next week, we will be joined by two ladies who are returning guests, Tina and Christine Riley from Cape Cod Advocate. So we'll talk a little bit more about virtual school, which could be the potential direction we're heading again in the holiday season, and how to navigate that with special ed, or if you have special ed concerns now that we're somewhat into the year, tips and tricks. So thank you again, Elana, for joining me.
Thank you, Amy.
See you all next week. See you next time on the Parapod.